Through the magic of television, I already have a pot of stock ready and done. Good morning, beautiful people. All right, you're gonna be hanging out in the kitchen with me today. Ben has finally finished the beef, the cow, the processing is all cut up and put away, and now it is my job to finish up all the loose ends for the things that I need to do. So today I'm going to be going over canning stew beef and also canning broth made from freshly roasted bones. So I'm gonna be going through the entire process with you guys from start to finish for both of those things and just explain the whole thing as I'm going for those of you who have been like, please show me how to can the meat or make the broth and can the broth and all that. So that's what we're gonna be doing today, and we're just gonna jump right in. Okay, I'm gonna do the canned beef first because that's gonna take a while to get up to pressure, and then it's gotta can for 90 minutes and all that. So I have my cubed stew beef here that Ben cut for me. I have washed clean jars. I've got my canning lids in a pot of water to simmer, and my pressure canner, because meat is a non-acidic food, has to be pressure canned, it's about 3 quarts of water in here, but it goes up to the line. So follow your canner's instructions. Just put as much water in there as they call for. So mine says go up to that bottom line, and that's what I do. What I'm going to be doing is the raw pack method, which is where you put raw meat into your jars. You don't add any liquid, and the canning process cooks it and it creates its own liquid. You can also do hot pack method, where you do cooked meat and then you usually add water or broth or something like that to the jars, fill it up to the 1-inch line. But I like to do raw pack for beef. I just feel like it works better. I don't know, turns out less dry, kind of just makes its own stew juices in the jar, and it works great. So I'm gonna get this meat packed into my jars with a 1-inch headspace, and then get everything lidded and sealed, and then we'll get it into the canner and get that started. You want it somewhat tightly packed in there, but not like super squished down, just kind of lightly squished. Alright, then I wipe the rims to clear the sealing surface. You can do this with just a wet rag and water, but I like to do it with vinegar, especially for meat, because it helps cut any grease that's on here, and I just prefer it. So I'm gonna get all these clean. Like you can see, there's some meat, there's some gunk. So that would could potentially prevent a good seal. So that's why we clean the surface. And that will get it ready for the lids. I have my freshly simmered lids. I believe that the need for simmering has been removed, I guess, by, you know, the powers that be who decide all these things. But I like to simmer them because it kind of loosens up the seal a little bit, and I feel like it seals better. And that's just kind of how I've always done it, so old dog and new tricks and all that. So these go on, centered on the jar. They're very hot, be careful. And then we place on our rings, fingertip tight. So I just grab it like that. I'm not gonna wrench it down, make it super, super tight, but just tight enough with my fingers to get it sealed and held on there. All right, because this is cold meat going into the canner, and I don't want to shock my jars, I have just room temperature, slightly warmer than room temperature water in there, and I have not preheated it. So usually if I'm putting hot jars into the hot canner, or into the canner, I'm going to be preheating the water, but I want it to all come to temperature at the same time. Also, you'll notice I didn't put salt in these. I generally don't add salt to any of my meat canning. One, because half the time I forget, and two, because I don't always know exactly what I'm going to be putting this in, and if I'm going to be adding it to a dish that already like has salt in it, or some broth that's got salt in it already, I don't want to overdo everything. So I don't put salt in it, and I can just salt the dish later as it goes. So cold jars in a cool canner, and then we're going to put the lid on, right? Close the lid, turn the heat to medium-high, and then I'm going to wait for this to vent. So part of the process is having to get all the air that's in there out. There's a little button here that steam will escape from here, and this will pop up and seal. And then once that seals, then steam starts to vent out of the vent hole here. And once that is a steady stream of steam, then we'll let it vent for 10 minutes, and then I will put the weight on it to seal that, and then it will start coming to pressure. For our elevation here, which is under 1,000 feet, it is 11 pounds of pressure, and for raw meat, it's 90 minutes. So we don't start the timer until it actually comes to the right 11 pounds of pressure. And then we start the timer, and then we have to keep it at 11 or slightly above for the entire time. If it goes under, then we have to start the timer all over again. It's a pain, so I just kind of watch it for a while. But right now, we're waiting for it to come to a simmer and start venting steam out of this button and then out of that vent hole. All right, the little button has popped over here. The steam is coming out of the vent now. So what I'm waiting for really is just, you can't see it very well, but I'm waiting for a very consistent stream. It's a little off and on right now. I'm just gonna wait another minute or two until that's like really going, and then we will start the timer for 10 minutes. So it vents for 10 minutes, and then we'll put the weight on. Okay, venting is done, gauge is on. I've turned this down a little bit because I don't want it to go crazy and, you know, just go crazy. I was gonna say explode, but that would freak people out. So it's not gonna explode, it's fine. I just don't want it to get too much pressure too fast, because if you go too much pressure too fast, then your jars can siphon and things like, you know, bubble out of them, and then it messes up your seal and it's all gross and disgusting inside. So we do it rather slowly. I've got this on a low, between medium and low, and we're gonna wait for this dial gauge to come to, like I said, for us it's 11 pounds pressure. Once it's at 11 pounds is when I will start the timer for our canning. As this is going in its timer, I'll just kind of keep an eye on it. You don't have to like babysit it, but keep an eye on it. Come back. Sometimes, especially if the weight starts to really jiggle and you can hear it, that's gone up a little too much. So I turn it down ever so slightly, let it come back down, but you don't want it to go below, for us, the 11 pounds. So I just adjust it in teeny tiny increments up and down the whole time while it's going through its timer. Okay, to get started with the beef broth, I'm gonna be roasting my bones. You don't have to do this. You can do what's called a blonde stock, which is unroasted bones, and you just put them in your pot with all your aromatics and everything. I like to roast them because it adds so much more flavor. And you can see there's some meat left on these. So what I do is I put these into a large roasting oven, and I don't do anything special. I just chuck them all in here as best I can, as best they will fit. This is a very, very big one. All right, so like I said, just kind of put them in here however they will fit, and ideally they'll fit in the oven as well. Man, that's big. Okay, it's like Tetris. You gotta kind of cram it in there. All right, something like that. I've lowered the rack in my oven so that it actually fits in there. You did notice the meat that is still on the bones, and I'm not worried about that. One, it's gonna add a ton of flavor to the stock itself, and then we try to get as much as we can out of everything, so we'll reclaim that. Once the stock is done, or these bones have like gotten to the point where the meat's falling off, I'll pull them out and we'll shred the meat off, or pull the meat off, and I will use that. Either I can make scrapple with it, a beef scrapple, or I'll use it, you know, in enchiladas or like rice or something like that, where we're just gonna still use the beef. So these are gonna go into the oven, preheated oven to 350. You could do anywhere between 350 and 400. I just like to do 350 because it gives me a little more like time. and they're gonna roast for a couple hours until the meat is browned. Some of this fat is kind of rendered off, and they just look really good and roasted. And then after that, we'll pull them out and we'll start our stock. Whew, that's heavy. All right, here we go. Ooh, yeah, those look good. Alrighty, those beef bones have been in there for a couple hours. They look amazing. They smell amazing. They smell really good, actually. So they're nice and brown. A lot of the fat has rendered off of them, and that's okay. When I go to put these in the broth, the stock pot, I'm actually just gonna add all that fat into the stock pot with them. It will get flavored with the aromatics that I put in, and it'll be great for like cooking potatoes or frying eggs or whatever we're gonna do with it. That'll be tasty. So these are actually ready to go in the stock pot. They're gonna go in my biggest stock pot. We're gonna fill it up with water and then add, I always do an onion, carrots, usually like 2 carrots, 2 ribs of celery, probably about 2 tablespoons of black peppercorns, 2 or 3 bay leaves, and then that's my go-to, and usually a couple cloves of garlic as well. That's my go-to. I do it for every batch of stock that I do. It's nice and aromatic. It gets those flavors in there, adds some richness, and then we're just gonna let it simmer for a couple hours. Timer is done, heat is off, that's it. Walk away, don't touch it. Leave it alone, let it cool off. The goal is for this to come down. This has to come all the way to 0. And then after that, we're still gonna let it cool a little bit more. Alrighty, through the magic of television, I already have a pot of stock ready and done. So I let this simmer. This is when I started the other day. I let this simmer for a couple hours that day, and then the next day I just turn it off when we go to bed and I leave it out on the stove. It stays pretty hot for the most part. It cools down a little bit, and then my thought is I'm gonna boil it again the next day. So there's nothing scary or weird going on. It's all good. So the next day I came in, it had reduced quite a bit, probably to about this much, and I decided I wanted to let it go more. I felt like the tendons hadn't broken down as much as I wanted, and it hadn't pulled as much out as I wanted, so I actually added water again just to cover and turned it on again. Let it come to a boil, turned it down, simmered it again for another couple hours, and then turned it off. This morning I brought it up to heat again just to get the fat kind of melted again so nothing's like sticking and all that. So now I'm gonna pull the bones out. They'll get set aside to pull the meat off of. Like I said, we'll use it for something else, and then this is going to get strained through a cheesecloth to get all the big particulates out. And then I'm going to put it in the fridge, and that's gonna let the fat rise to the top and solidify, so I can pull that off the next day. Like I said, we'll save that for cooking, for eating, for doing what we're gonna do culinarily wise, and because it's gonna have that flavor of the broth and the veggies and stuff that was in it, and then the stock will be on the bottom, and then so we can deal with that stock and get it canned when it's ready to go. Heavy bones. Don't touch it.
Why?
Because it's all oily. It's fatty.
Go! Strain!
It is. It's straining.
Strain!
It is.
Strain!
Okay, honey. It's alright. It's going. Alright, again, through the magic of television, this is actually quite convenient to have this project in various stages, so I can just pull it out and show y'all. Alright, this is the broth that I strained and put in the fridge overnight. You can see there's quite a fat cap on there. So I'm going to pull all this fat off, set it aside, and then we will take a look at the stock that's underneath, and then I'm going to get it reheated. While I'm waiting for this to depressurize and come down, I'm just going to get this stock reheated and ready to, okay, it's almost there, and ready to go. And get my jars ready and all that kind of stuff so that when these come out, I can get my broth in there. I also have a little bit of stew meat left, so we will probably can that together, even though it does add to the time because stock does not take as long to can. But if we can do it all in one shot, then all the better. So I'm gonna get this fat pulled off and we'll see how the stock looks underneath. All right, looks like we got about a 1/2 inch of fat on there, which is pretty good. And we will use this for potatoes, roasted vegetables, anything really, cooking our eggs in it. All right, there's a little bit of broth gelatin stuck to the bottom of this, so I'm just gonna scrape it up and put it back in the pan. That is all pulled off. I will set this aside and deal with this a little bit later. What I'm gonna do with it, I'll just explain it now, is put this in a little pot, remelt it, and boil off any of the little bits of moisture that are left, the liquid, because the moisture makes it not keep as long. It might mold or something in the fridge. And then once it's melted and that's boiled off, then I'll put it in a quart jar or some kind of storage container and keep it either in the fridge or in the freezer. And we will, like I said, we'll use that for frying and cooking, whatever we're gonna do with it. The reason that I pulled all that fat off rather than just leaving it in here and canning it, for one, I want it for cooking because that's a lot of delicious, beautiful, amazing fat, and it's gonna make really good meals later. But also, too much fat in your stock can, if it happens to siphon out, it can ruin your seal. And if you have like a lot of fat, it can prevent the heat exchange. And so your heat won't penetrate as far into your canned goods as it's supposed to during the canning process. So it could potentially be unsafe. I'm really just worried about keeping that fat to eat because it's tasty. And honestly, that was so much fat, it would take up a ton of room in the jars, and it would be like 1/2 jar of fat and 1/2 jar of stock. I'd rather have a whole jar of stock. So this is beautiful, gelatinous goodness. We're gonna get this reheated so it's ready for canning. One thing I did want to point out is the canning process does kind of break down some of that gelatin and collagen, so it's not gonna be as gelatinous after you can it. It's still gonna be good for you. I mean, you really can't go wrong with homegrown, grass-fed, home roasted, rendered, all that beef stock. But some people are gonna notice afterwards that their canned goods, their canned broth won't be as gelatinous as it was before it went in, and that's just part of, because the high heat from the canning process just breaks that down a little bit so it doesn't get quite as jiggly. This has popped down. This has come, the dial gauge has come completely to 0, and I don't mean it's just at 0, but it's like pegged on the little peg here. So now that that is cooled there completely, we're gonna take off the gate, or the weight, and we're gonna wait again. I'm gonna wait 10 minutes, maybe 15. Sometimes I've noticed for me here, I don't know if it's the altitude or what, even though we're under 1,000-foot elevation, sometimes even if I wait the 10 minutes that it requires, when I open the lid, it still is like bubbling and spurting. So I wait a little bit longer, let it cool even more, and then after that time period, I'm gonna take the lid off. Then what I do is wait another 10 minutes before I take the jars out. Depending on your pressure canner, maybe they have different instructions. Mine says wait the 10 minutes after you take the gauge off, and then you can take everything out. I like to give it that extra time just to get it to normalize to room temperature. I have found it's better that way for me personally. They don't sputter and siphon out. So a little bit extra time is fine for a better product that I don't have to worry about the seal being ruined. All right, we cooled without the weight on it. Took the lid off, cooled again. We're doing pretty good, looks great. So I'm gonna pull these out and get them set onto the counter, and then they're gonna cool at room temperature for the rest of the night. I'll just leave them overnight. And when they're done, we'll remove the rings, and then they'll be ready for storage. Okay, for the broth or stock, we are going to do the same thing. I have my washed clean jars, I've got my stock, I've got simmering lids in the background here, and I've got my canner with the about 3 or so quarts of water filled up to the line. For this one, I'm gonna do a hot pack method. Technically it's hot pack because I have brought my broth or stock to a roaring boil, and I just turned it off, so it's very, very hot. And we're gonna be packing that, or pouring that, it's not really packing when it's a liquid, pouring that into my jars and wiping the rims and lidding them and getting them into the canner, exact same process. I debated doing the beef stew at the same time, but for the sake of it making sense to y'all, I wanted to do just the broth because it does have a different canning time. So I'm gonna get these filled up, we'll get them in the canner, and then we'll get that going. For the sake of cleanliness with liquid things, I use a canning funnel. If you were really, really steady and good at this, you probably wouldn't need one, but I make a mess. So we're gonna fill these up to 1 inch headspace and get them capped off. Alright, you'll notice that this one's not all the way full, even though I've used all my broth, so I'm actually just going to top it off with water. Since this was pretty concentrated anyways, it's not going to make that much of a difference. And then we will have a full jar. And again, I'm wiping down the rims with vinegar, particularly because broth is greasy, and the vinegar helps cut that grease to get a good seal. So, whew, freshly simmered lids right on top. And fingertip tight is hard to do when you have very hot jars. I'll use a towel to kind of hold the jars. I don't feel like burning my fingers today. Since these are hot jars with hot liquid in them, I'm putting them into my canner that is heating already. So I've got this kind of on low, so it's keeping the water hot. Okay, you will notice that this is actually not a full canner load. A full canner load for mine is 7 quarts, and I think most of them are 7 quarts. And that's okay. For my canner, the instructions say as long as there's at least 4 quarts in there, then you're good. You can run a load and it's fine. So I've got 5 in there. We're good. That's because it needs the certain amount of space taken up for the pressure for it to act correctly. So as long as there's 4 quarts in mine, then it's gonna pressurize the way it's supposed to and it's all good. So I've got the 5 in here, and then we're just gonna run it the exact same way we did the meat. We're gonna put the lid on, we're gonna let it vent. You know, that little button's gonna pop, and then we're gonna vent out the vent tube, and then let that go for 10 minutes. Put the weight on, bring it to pressure. Once it hits, for us, 11 pounds, then we're gonna start the timer. For broth, if you're doing just broth with no meat or veggies or anything in it, and that means no veggies like in the jars. If you put veggies in your broth when you're making it, that's fine. But no veggies in the jars, then it's 25 minutes. Way faster than beef or meat in general. And I wanted to do it all just the stock, so I wasn't confusing you with the times for doing meat in there as well. So this will be 25 minutes once we get up to pressure. Alright, just like before with the meat, we're going to let this completely depressurize. This little button's going to pop down, and then once that dial is pegged all the way down, then I'm going to take the weight off, wait 10 minutes, take the lid off, wait 10 minutes, and then I'll be able to pull out my jars. Alright, there you go. These have sat overnight, they have cooled. I now have a beautiful jar of canned beef, shelf stable, ready to go for anything I want to use it for. So now that they've cooled and they're ready for the pantry, I remove the ring. You always want to store your jars without the ring on it because the ring can interfere with the seal over time. And then I wash my jars on the outside. So I wash it on the lid and all over the side. For one, that helps remove any grease or, crud that was on it from the canning process And also, if you have a clean jar that goes into your pantry and you know it's clean, and you do this for all your jars, then if you find one that has grease or crud or something oozing down the side, you know that your seal has failed and something wrong has happened. So I always put clean washed jars into our pantry so that I know just by sight. If I see anything on the outside that looks kind of funky and weird, then something's gone wrong with that, and we toss it. And that's it. I label and date them with what they are, and I just put a month and a year. And that way I know which needs to be rotated through, so we're using the oldest first, and they're ready to go. And now I have a couple meals sitting in my pantry ready to go for those nights when I'm just like, I don't even know what I'm cooking. I've been busy all day. We're gonna heat up some rice and throw some beef and some veggies in it. We're good to go. I really hope this has been super helpful for you. You'll notice that the canning process is really very similar from batch to batch to batch. The only thing that changes is the amount of time, really, for how long you have to process it. But the process itself is the same pretty much for every batch. You might just change it up a little bit depending on if you're doing raw pack or hot pack. A couple of really good books that I love that have helped me in the beginning, and then just, you know, I use for reference still to this day, is the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving. This is what got me started. My grandmother got it for me when I was fairly newly married, and I refer to this one a lot for good times. It's got some fancy recipes in here, and then it's got a lot of just the basics. And then also the Ball Blue Book Guide to Preserving. This one has some more like value added stuff in it, but also some basics as well, and I refer to this as well. And then I also have the USDA's Complete Guide to Home Canning, I think is what it's called. I found it for like 20 bucks on Amazon, and it's got very, very basic recipes for the most part. So I refer to that when I'm just like, okay, what's beef again and how long? I forget. So those are all great books. I'll put all of those in the description below for you guys to check out if you're looking for something. And I will also, if my canner is still available, I will link my canner for you guys as well. So like I said, I really hope this was helpful for you guys, and I hope that it has inspired you to put fresh canned meat and broth on your pantry shelves as well. Catch you guys on the next one.